Oh hey, comment ça va? I'm Marc, a professional artist, an art teacher, and a YouTuber, I guess. Let's throw it out in there. I release new tutorials like this one every single Friday, and well, today I'm going to teach you how to paint light, which is legit one of the best ways to make your art look way better. People will stop and stare if you get good at it. It's the law. It's really one of those wow skills that can almost carry a drawing or a painting by itself. And if you don't believe me, check this drawing out. Just flat colors and lines, that's it. Not much to it, but then add one light. Bruh, much better. Maybe we can add another one. Oh, wee. So let's see how it's done and how to get better at it. Alright, so I wanted to make a video on this topic since it was really the last big missing piece of my entire coloring process that I hadn't explained yet in details. You can check out my previous video showing the whole process for a little bit more context, but it's not necessary. There's just been, a lot of interest, so I figure you might like it too. Check the link for it in the top right corner of the screen here or down in the description below. I'm tackling lighting last because it comes dead last in my coloring process, as simple as that. So if you've watched my previous tutorials on shading, coloring with gradient maps, and skin painting, this is the final part, so it's good that you're watching it. So as a quick recap of the process, we start with a line art drawing, then we add flat colors, then we do the shading, and then finally the lights. Like you saw in the intro though, shading is kind of an optional step here, especially if you get good at painting lights. I personally prefer with shading, but some people prefer without. Either way, it doesn't matter. In both cases, we'll be dealing with lights, and well, the idea is that as long as you can paint it well, your art will look great and people will react positively to it. In my book, light contributes to about 70% of the overall wow factor, so a lot. It's pretty hard to pull off though, but I have some good go-to tricks that I've used over the years, and this is what I'll be teaching you today in the next couple minutes. Of course, I can go into too much details like I do with my students and spend hours on the topic because it really needs hours, but hopefully still after this short video, it should be enough for your art to clearly level up. Not a bad deal. Oh, and another thing before I continue, like I mentioned in last week's video that you can watch in the top right corner of the screen, I'm giving something pretty awesome this week, like I do once in a while, so stick around to know all the details of the giveaway. Want a hint? Fine, it's a new Artist 24 Pro display tablet by XP Pen. So yeah, it's getting serious folks, but that's for later. Now let's paint some light. Let's start with a light speed review of our fundamentals so that we know what we're dealing with here when it comes to light, especially if this stuff is news to you. If you're already familiar with painting light, well, you can skip ahead like 30 seconds to get to the juicy tips, but a quick reminder never hurts. First, to understand how light behaves, we have to imagine any light source as a big gun shooting a bunch of tiny bouncing balls at whatever it's pointing at. Like a spotlight. We'll call that light coming from the light source the key light. It's not the only light of interest, though. Usually you'll have a lot of light bouncing around too when aiming that light source at surfaces, right? Bouncing balls shot at a wall will bounce back. That's called the bounce light. So, key light and bounce light. The main difference here will be in their intensity. Light usually loses intensity when it bounces off most surfaces, so bounce light is never as bright or intense as the key light. And the reason we're painting a light is just that it's a hell of a lot more straightforward than painting shadows. Painting shadows only really makes sense if you're limited by your medium somehow, like with traditional art. For digital art though, we can just use a more logical, physics-based approach to the whole process. My workflow is near identical to the 3D workflow, which is, based on real-life physics, and which makes a lot more sense to most people, and it's easier to learn and to apply than traditional techniques. If you feel like you might need to go over that in more details, you're in luck. I posted a video a few months back on lighting fundamentals, so link up here in the right corner and down below, of course. Now let's take a look at what we have here. So this is going to be the character that I'll be painting today, painting a light on today. And on the right here, we have the 4 different steps that we'll be tackling for this tutorial. So the first one is to see your drawing as a simple shape, or rather simple shapes, plural. And this first one is very, very important because most people looking at this won't really see this when they paint the light. Instead, we'll tend to see something that looks like this. So a simplified version of the drawing with simplified volumes, because painting a light or calculating, in our heads how to paint the lights is a lot simpler when the shapes are simpler as well. If we look at this, I mean, it's a bunch of really, really intricate shapes, all the different muscles interconnecting, and it's just a lot to take in if we look at this alone. So instead, what we do is we analyze what we have in here and we try to transform or replace all the different parts of the character or your environment, whatever it is, with simple shapes like this. Now you can actually do this step like I did here, or you can just keep it in your mind, especially if you've done this before. But this step is extremely important because from here, we'll be able to move on to the second step here, which will be to start with a simple top light. I feel personally like a top light is one of the easier ones to play around with, because all you have to think about really is to add a light to any of the faces of those volumes that's pointing directly up. And so if you can paint, a 3D sphere like this, maybe at a slight angle, a slight perspective, so let's say this is like the ground grid for that sphere. Now let's say I want to add like some green light to this thing here. Well, first I'm going to try to find where the halfway point of that sphere is, which is probably something like that, right? Based on my grid on the ground here. And of course, at this point, you should be able to do the same here. So be able to position your volume in 3D like this, in 3D space, find where the middle of it is, and be able to tell approximately which faces are pointing up more than the other ones. So of course, up here on the top of my sphere, that's going to be the brightest spot, and then it'll just fade away as it reaches the halfway point, beyond which the light cannot reach. So start with a simple top light, and then what would this look like for our character here? Something like this. Again, very, very simple. We're only shading simple shapes. The tricky part will be figuring out where those shapes are blocking the lights. So in this case, figuring how to draw this line right there. So why is there no light on the thighs, and why is there some light on the lower leg? Now in my case, I have a quick disclaimer to make for this particular drawing here. My light source is not exactly top down. It didn't look good, and if it were, you wouldn't be able to see any light here on the legs. So you would just find light on the top of the body, and everything else will be in the shadows. So I thought that was kind of boring. So instead, I just inclined my light very slightly like this, which is why now we're able to see a little bit of light at the base of the feet. But really, how you're able to imagine that is kind of on the tricky side. It's probably the hardest part of this entire tutorial. And I really haven't found a better way to do it than this over all my years of practice. And it's really like anything else, the more you practice it, the better you'll get at it. But really, what you have to do is to imagine that the light is like a camera and you're behind the lens. So almost as if you were the light yourself. And the mental trick, the mental challenge here is to try to imagine everything that you would see, because everything that you don't see will not receive any light. If I were to imagine this guy, you would have the torso, I have the shoulders here, kind of overlapping, but I have the head somewhere up here in the front. And this guy, by the way, is facing forward, so this way. And we're looking at it from the top view in case this is not clear yet. So what else? What else would we see? If we think about the feet, I don't know that we'll be able to see the feet from here. Maybe like this foot is like this, pointing forward. Maybe the back foot, that one is a little bit to the side there. We might be able to see the arms though, like the side of the arms here. So like the bicep and the elbow, maybe part of the forearm and the hand. Let's say we're able to see this. And so all of this that we're able to see here in red will receive some light, and everything that's in turquoise, like the feet, would not receive any light. And that's what we get. So I'm lucky in a sense because I've worked all these years in 3D. So this was, I would spend 8 hours in front of the computer looking at 3D and how light reacts with the different objects and how seeing things in space, and basically what we see right here. But the exercise I'm recommending that you try is this here. So we have a light source shooting down at the big sphere and the character there. So what you're trying to do really is go behind the light like this. This part of the sphere is going to get some light. That part of the character is going to get some light. But the second that we move, the second that we change the point of view, now we'll see what happens. Like, oh, there we go. So it's just that sphere casting a circular shadow onto the character. It's great if you have a 3D software that you can use to play around with this, or just use any toy that you have at home, any like blocks that you might have somewhere. Anything really would work with a good desk lamp. And what you have to practice is looking through the light. So you go behind your spotlight, you look at your blocks, you look at your toys and what it looks like, and then you change the view. So maybe you go from the front, and what does that shadow translate into from a different angle? But yeah, this is something that nobody practices because it's not obvious to practice, but it is extremely important to be able to paint good lights. The beauty of of this process here is that once you're able to do it on a simplified version of your character, well, that same shadow that same light should still look pretty good on your actual drawing. If I remove everything except the lights, already like this guy looks pretty solid. I mean, of course, there's no details, nothing, right? Because our simple shapes were just that, simple shapes. But we're already starting from a really good point here, and all we'll have to do is zoom in and try to look at all the different smaller shapes now that we have, and treat all the details, like all the individual muscles, as simple shapes. So basically doing the same process again with smaller details. So what do we have here? This is probably like a sphere. We got another sphere here. The trap's there. That section of the trap could be another sphere, 2 spheres down here. You get the idea. And from there, well, we can improve the shading of this a little bit more. So if we have a big sphere here for the traps, we know that on the opposite side of the sphere, so below, we're not going to get as much light. We know that on this sphere here for the posterior delt, the bottom of it is not going to get as much light. Same thing with this one here. And when you repeat the process for everything, well, already it's starting to look pretty cool. You might end up with something like this. So again, looks very similar. It's just a little bit more detailed, right? Because I went in here and I tried to imagine these secondary volumes and how the light would react on those. So now what we have here looks pretty good. There's a couple improvements that we could do to this though. And so always make sure that you have one light source per layer so that you can have things like this. So we're going to add some inner glow, some like orange inner glow. Ooh, much nicer. A nice little touch here. Inner glow set to hard light with orange color. Ship it. And now we're going to move on to another light source, because one light source, it's great. It's already a huge bonus. We went from this to this. I think the difference speaks for itself. But what looks even better is to have a secondary light source in here. So remember, we have our key light. That's going to be the strongest one. In this case, I'm using the key light as the light of the sun. So it's coming from the top, coming from the sky. And we're going to have another light source, which is going to be not as intense, but maybe some blue light coming from the bottom. So before you add any new light, always hide whatever you have. Go back to like a clean slate so that you're not distracted by anything. And then you can start to do the same process again. So this is definitely next level challenging. Now, instead of trying to imagine all the faces that are pointing up, we're trying to imagine the faces that are in that kind of angle, pointing in that direction. What I looked at first was this. And I tried to imagine, okay, so if I have a light coming from below here, where would that light be able to hit? So if anything, in a sense, if you have the top-down light already done, it's a lot easier to imagine where a light from an opposite direction would look like, because it's going to be mostly where you don't have lights already. So if we add both lights together, yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, the layer styles that I use for these are always hard lights, almost always, because hard light tends to look pretty good regardless if your flat colors are darker or lighter. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned though is that my flat colors, now we're ready for the final adjustments, and this is where the last point here comes into play. So layer your lights. Make sure that each light is on its own layer. And now we're able to decide or to play around with which is the key light and which is the bounce light. Once again, the bounce light, the only difference is that it's going to be a little bit less intense. So if the bounce light was the blue light here, all you'd have to do is kind of reduce the opacity a little bit. And then you're left with something like this. It looks pretty cool. Or maybe this is going to be the key light, and the top light is going to be the bounce light, secondary light, something like this. Of course, you can always change the color, but maybe the top light now is going to be blue, and maybe the other light source is slightly different. Maybe it's like a sunset. And just like that, I have two characters lit completely differently. Even better is that I'm left with a setup here that is super flexible. If I decide to change the lights, change the light colors, maybe change the intensity, I can always do that super quickly. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of lights. Now, how do you practice this stuff? How do you get better? Well, you're in luck. I actually came up with a couple of exercises here that I would highly recommend that you practice in order, of course, as you gain a little bit more confidence. So first level here, if you're just starting with this, if you haven't really painted light before at all, start by drawing just simple geometric shapes and applying a top-down light on them. Once again, use references if this is a little bit hard to just do from imagination. There's nothing wrong with that. We learn when we use references. Then when that becomes easy, you can move on to level 2, basically multiple lights on simple geometric shapes, a little bit more challenging. Next, you can move on to level 3, which is to add out of frame elements, blocking the light partially. So this goes back to something like this, which is really cool. It's a really cool effect. And basically it's the same as if you had a frame like this for this drawing here, right? So there's an element on the outside somewhere in my scene, but I can't see it, that is blocking the light from this character. And this tends to look really, really cool if you use it well. Now, of course, it requires you to imagine an object blocking the light, the third step here. So imagine that you are the light. But if you can pull it off, it usually looks really, really cool. So if we look at this guy, maybe, maybe part of his head and his torso, maybe like the left shoulder. Here's partially in the shadows because the light can't reach those areas because there's something blocking it from above. And this looks super dramatic. So this is something that I'll use all the time. Let's say I want to draw attention to one particular area of a character maybe and not another one. In this case, if I wanted to feature his back and not his head, well, that's a good way to do it. Level 4. Top light on your actual drawing, so not simple shapes anymore. We're actually playing with light on a drawing, on a real drawing. So that's level 4 because it is significantly harder. Then if that becomes comfortable, and you can move on to level 5, which is different angles for the key light. So basically what I did here with the purple light. And then if you're feeling like an absolute beast and you want to try the max level here, well, this is going to be, well, exactly this here. So layered lights, so 2 different lights or more. You can have 3 lights, 4 lights, plus an out of frame element blocking the light onto the subject. I hope that will help you get started with painting light or go to the next level with your light game. All right, this is going to wrap up this video for today. And I think it's time for the giveaway. So to participate in the giveaway for a chance to win a brand new Artist 24 Pro tablet, you're going to have to do only 3 simple things. First, make sure that you're subscribed to both my channel and XP Pen's channel. Click like on the video and leave a comment. That's it. If you do that, you're going to get 1 vote. You also get a bonus vote if you're following me on Instagram. So I'll announce the winner next week on all my social media accounts, and I'll put the details, all the details of the giveaway down in the description of this video. So make sure you check that out and good luck. And you know what to do. If this video was helpful, tell your dog. If you don't have a dog, well, tell your friends. And if you paint some cool lights on one of your drawings, let me know by tagging me on social media. Who knows, maybe I'll feature you on my accounts. All right, stay creative and I'll see you.